Wait, are we recording? Hold on. Let me fix these lights here. Let me sync the audio. Hey everyone, what's up? Welcome back to Make the Music. And today I want to cover what I think are some of the worst mixing tips out there when it comes to especially beginners trying to get into this whole mixing thing. It seems like there's a lot of great information. Absolutely. There's a ton of great information, not just on my channel, but of course on many other channels out there. But there's also a lot of bad information. I don't know how these things start exactly. They typically don't come from the pros. They actually come from people just on the internet or different forums or things like that come up with these things. I don't know where they get them, but they end up making it down to beginners. They can actually set them back quite a ways. I know it did for me. So I'm gonna get into the top 4 mixing tips that are actually killing your mixes. These are counterproductive, and then I also have a bonus tip at the end. But real quick, I'd really like it if you could like and subscribe to the channel. This shows that you like these types of videos and you want me to keep doing this. And also, if you feel so inclined, you can go to my Patreon page or join the YouTube channel in the description down below. So the first tip that I want to bring up that seems to be promulgated out here on the YouTube mixing sphere is the fact that you shouldn't use any mix bus processing at all, right? You should just completely leave the mix bus untouched, and you need to mix everything from the ground up. Now, I do think that you can go too heavy-handed on the mix bus. Absolutely, you do need to have good fundamentals when it comes to mixing individual instruments. But to think that pro-level mixers, I'm talking the Chris Lord-Alges, the Andy Wallaces, right? The guys who are Manny Marquand, the guys that are getting it done, that have the big gigs and have mixed the big records, they have mix bus processing. Okay, they have compression, they have EQ. Another thing people don't realize is they usually have these mixing consoles. What these mixing consoles do is actually a form of mix bus processing. They just don't realize it. The analog form of the console, the fact that the console can bend to the transients and add a character, is a form of mix bus processing. Now, it doesn't mean you have to absolutely use mix bus processing to get a good mix, but I think it's actually super beneficial to getting you further to getting that pro sounding mix. Really adding a compressor to do some light compression, a little bit of EQ, maybe a little bit of saturation really can help the mix go a long ways. And I think it's counterproductive and actually just a flat out lie to say that the pros don't use mix bus processing. They absolutely do. Chris Lord-Alge has a Pultec EQ, or he's got the Red Scarlet EQ. He's got some mix bus compression and limiting going on. Tom Lord-Alge uses the SSL compressor, right? There's a reason that plugin is so popular, is because it's on so many mixes, right? So if you're not using any mix bus processing, just start out, adding a few plugins. I've got tons of videos on mix bus processing down below. Add a little compression, add a little EQ. You'll find that your mix comes together so much easier, glues so much quicker. You won't have to do all this extra work that you were doing in the mix process. And that's how the pros get it done. So I don't see any reason why you shouldn't give it a try in your next mix. Next mixing tip that's actually destroying your mixes is the idea that you need saturation and tape and analog simulation on all of your tracks. This is just absolutely ridiculous, all right? There's tons of pros who don't mix like this. And I find that, yes, in the analog world back in the day, everything was going through a console, right? But consoles have a lot of bend, okay? They add analog saturation and flavor in a very musical way. That's how these consoles kept getting used. And while I do think the emulations that like Slate puts out and Waves put out, they're very high quality, they're good. I find that adding some harmonic distortion or some console simulation, maybe a virtual tape machine on the master chain, the mix bus, is enough to give you that analog flavor. You don't need to be putting on a virtual tape machine, a console simulation, saturation, and distortion on every single track just to get it to sound good, whatever that means. Or for some reason, analog is considered to be equal to good. And it is a flavor, it is a color, but it doesn't mean your track is automatically going to sound good. A bunch of crappy tracks run through some analog processing are still going to be crappy tracks, okay? And the key here with using the saturators and using the analog plugins is subtlety. You don't want to go over the top with these, because all of that distortion in the digital domain built up over 50, 60, 70 tracks, it adds up to a really cluttered and sort of confusing and mess of a mix. So a lot of beginner mixers I see, they don't know how to add these elements in with enough flourish, with enough touch. They just are told, hey, you need saturation to get that pro analog sound, just throw it on everything. They do it way too much, and their mix actually ends up sounding like a total mess. Early on, put some of that saturation, like I said, on the mix bus, maybe on a few elements, and then learn over time to add color to your mixes with these virtual tape machine plugins, with these console simulation plugins, because they are really cool, but you need to learn over time how to add them with subtlety. So I'm not telling you to mix afraid, but I do find that there's a lot of beginner mixes that sound just way too overcooked. Things just sound way too distorted. It's because they got tons of saturation and distortion plugins on there, right? Not just one, but like 4 different kinds on these things. And all it does is just degrade your sound even further to a point where there's no clarity left. It just sounds like a mushy mess at the end of the day. The third tip that I find that is actually killing your mixes is to use EQ plugins to sweep for resonant frequencies in your different instruments to clean up your mix. Now, there's certainly a time and place for this, especially with highly distorted guitar tones, vocals recorded in rooms that aren't so great. I think there is definitely an opportunity to sweep and find some bad sources or some bad source frequencies in those specific instruments and get them out, absolutely. But to go through all your instruments and take an EQ notch and boost the crap out of it and then sweep all your instruments for strong or resonant frequencies is just going to, you're going to end up with the most ridiculous sounding mix you've ever had. I don't find this tip to be very useful. What I really think you should do is listen to the instrument and listen to it in the context of the mix as well and go, hey, is there something really sticking out? Notice it first. Don't go looking for these resonant frequencies, right? But if you hear a hiss or a hum or a screechy sound in a guitar tone, okay, you've recognized it, it's there. Now let's sweep for it. Now let's find it and pull it out, right? And as opposed to, I'm just going to add a bunch of high boosted notches to my EQ plugin, and I'm just going to find 6 or 7 frequencies that I didn't even hear in there, right? There's going to be resonant frequencies in instruments. That's how instruments work. And when you take them all out, it's going to end up sounding really weird, flat and dull. The fundamental notes are going to be gone. So it's not something you're going to want to be doing to every instrument. Like I said, maybe on a kick drum, the way you hit the mic in the room, there's a weird resonant frequency in the lower mids, or a lot of times with vocals, somewhere around 300 to 700, there's a very weird boxiness that would be good to pull out. Or guitar tones, right? From 2 to 6K, there's usually something weird down there, weird up there, right? So I don't have a problem with that, but I'm going to go to the bass guitar, I'm going to go to the piano, right? And I'm going to boost 4 or 5 frequencies, completely overdoing it. You're going to end up with a totally weird sounding mix. So I think in principle you can apply that, but don't overdo it and be really careful about that, or you're going to end up with some very weird sounding instruments. And the bonus tip is that you need expensive plugins to get a great sounding mix. This is absolutely wrong. You do not need the latest high-tech expensive plugins. A lot of mixing engineers, they're using plugins that are like 10 years old. I mean, how old is the virtual mix rack at this point? I mean, is it 10 years old, 10 plus years old? And it still sounds amazing, still gets the job done, right? Your stock plugins that come in your DAW these days sound absolutely incredible, and people would have killed for those tools 20 years ago. They would have killed for those tools 40 years ago, right? So you absolutely have the tools you need to get a great sounding mix, okay? They come installed in your DAW. And then I've showed you on this channel free tools that you can branch out to that maybe add a different color or a different flourish, right? If you start doing this thing long enough and you find a need and you want to invest and pay plugins, I think that's totally fine. You should totally go for that. But starting out thinking, oh, unless I get XYZ plugin bundle, or unless I spend a bunch of money on Black Friday and get all these expensive plugins, I can never get a pro sounding mix. Absolutely not. What do you think a console is, right? A console is just basic EQ, basic compression, right? And that's what mostly a mix consists of, right? And your DAW comes with that already loaded in. Using stock Reaper EQ and compression plugins, okay, I used that for years and I got great sounding results. Yes, I use some different tools now because I wanted to and I had a specific reason to, and I could afford them down the road, right? But if someone said, hey, here's a laptop, here's a fresh installation of Reaper, you got to do this mix, I could easily do it, because it's all about applying the concepts. It's all about the knowledge that you have and your knowledge of the tools as opposed to the tools themselves. Like I said, it doesn't mean there aren't cool tools out there. There's nothing wrong with owning them, but if you don't learn the basics with the stock plugins to begin with, you're not going to be able to learn how to apply those paid tools in the correct way. So I hope those tips were helpful. Like I said, you should like and subscribe to the channel down below. That tells me, hey, I should make more videos like this. And if you have any questions, you should leave it in a comment down below. I also have a free guide called the Home Studio Gear Guide. If you're looking to set up your studio, you're not sure where to start, you can download that guide in the description box. It's 100% free. I want to thank you guys for hanging out with me today. And anyways, I'll see you guys next time.